There is no junk mile here. You should be running every pace from all-out sprint to very easy, but the emphasis of when you run at each pace is what matters. Now, if you want to get better at your race, you might want to get better at the thing that limits your performance. We have to identify what that is. Well, it's not your VO2 max, because you're only 85%. You ever have junk laying around? How about in your running? Do you run junk miles? I'm here to tell you, there's no such thing as a junk mile. So maybe you want to run 50 miles in a week and you're at 47, so you just go out and you run 3 miles nice and easy. It's not really a workout, it's not really going to improve anything, it's just like satisfying the logbook. That's what we sometimes call a junk mile, but I'm here to tell you that junk miles don't exist. In fact, what we used to think were junk miles are actually pivotal, really key, important to your training. And there's no pace, I'll say that again, there's no pace that is off limits. And in fact, throughout your training cycle, you should be hitting on every single pace. I'm gonna break down in this video for you why that is. I'm gonna debunk the idea of a junk mile, but I want you to really understand it so that you can apply the right kind of training. No matter how much time you have leading up to your race, you're gonna know what paces to run. Are you ready? This is gonna be so awesome. Now, the idea with junk miles is twofold. The first one is that if you run a very slow jog, that you're not going to improve as much, and therefore those easy miles that you're just getting in order to get the miles for the week, that those miles are junk miles. That's the first way that you can think about it. But there's another way to think about junk miles that's at a higher level, and still this one is going to hurt your running. I'm gonna prove it to you in 3, 2, 1, boom. So I'm going to create for you here a training pyramid. Now, this is gonna represent all of the paces that you can have. So if we call all the way down here very easy running and all the way at the top very hard running, this is gonna be a continuum. So we're gonna call this pace lactate threshold, LT, lactate threshold. Now, the idea is instead of running easy, you can increase the pace until you're at your lactate threshold, at which point you're getting a benefit of improving your lactate. This is the idea. But you can go faster than lactate threshold, and you've probably heard of this one too. VO2 max is essentially the amount of oxygen that you can uptake in a certain amount of time based off of your weight. We measure it in ml/kg minutes, which is milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. It's basically how much oxygen you can use. So you do have a lactate threshold and a VO2 max, and generally a better runner is gonna have a higher level of those, generally. But there's one that's really important, and that is, you've probably heard of this before, I'm just gonna call this R, and R stands for running economy. And I also like using the letter R because R is good for thinking about how you train your running economy, and you do that through repetition training, which is just like really fast running, but not quite a sprint. All right, now we have the no man's lands, and these are junk miles. Now, I'm actually going to debunk this for you in a minute, but I want you to understand what the running community says junk miles are. Now, we've already talked about junk miles being very easy running. That's kind of like too easy to have much of a benefit. But the other way to think about junk miles is everything that's not repetition training, VO2 max training, or lactate threshold. So that would leave us with saying that anything that's really fast, all out, that's a junk mile. Anything that's too slow to improve your running economy, but faster than we need for a VO2 max, anything in here, that this is a junk mile. Because if you're gonna run in this no man's land here, you might as well run a little faster and get the running economy benefit, or you might as well save yourself a little bit and run a little bit slower, run VO2 max pace, and just do more of it. That's the rationale. But we can go between these two as well. If you're running at VO2 max pace, which is a pace that you could maybe maintain for about 11 or 12 minutes in a race, so maybe like a 2-mile race, a 5K if you're really world class. But if you're gonna run at VO2 max, cool. But if you're gonna run a little bit slower than VO2 max, you're missing out on the benefit of getting VO2 max. And so you might as well slow it all the way down until you're at your lactate threshold, which means that all of this in here becomes a junk mile as well. Now we have another one. We have lactate threshold, and what happens below that? Because lactate threshold is still a pace that you might be able to maintain for about 50 or 60 minutes in a race. So it's kind of fast, but it's not really all that fast. You can maintain it for a pretty good time. So it's not even an easy run. So below lactate threshold, we then have another no man's land where if you're running slower than lactate threshold, you might as well slow it all the way down until you're running truly easy. And easy would be a pace that you can maintain for, I don't know, your just normal daily run, or a long run, or maybe a recovery run. So in between intervals or on a day that's almost rest, but you're gonna go out and jog a little bit, these would be appropriate paces as well. But then anything below this, anything easier than an easy run would be, again, junk miles. So the idea of a junk mile is really this. It's that you should be running only these paces. You should be running either a recovery pace, or you can run at lactate threshold, or you can run at VO2 max, or you can run at repetition pace. And anything other than those four, you're basically screwing up. Now, there is a couple of fallacies that start to jump out, and we're gonna actually take each of these here and debunk them for you. So the first thing is that even coaches who subscribe to this model still say that there's one big caveat. And that caveat is that there's another pace hidden in here. And that pace is marathon pace. Now, marathon pace is faster than an easy recovery pace, but it's slower than lactate threshold. And it's maybe somewhere around here, okay? So we're gonna call that marathon pace. So we now have 1, 2, 3, 4 paces that you might run, 5 paces that you might run if you're a marathoner. Now, why does it change for a marathoner? Because you want to become efficient at running at exactly whatever pace you're going to run for your race. Makes sense, right? If you're going to plan to run an 8-minute mile for your marathon, you don't want to just train easy, which might be like a 10-minute mile, your lactate threshold, which might be a 7:30 mile, your VO2 max, which might be a 6:50, and your repetition, which might be whatever, 6-minute flat. Because never are you training your body to do the demands of race day, and that would be a mistake. So we add in marathon pace. But here's where it starts to get interesting. Okay, pay attention to this, because this will blow your mind. What if you were a 5K runner? Well, a 5K runner is going to also need to run at race pace, but 5K pace, depending on how fast you are, it's going to be maybe just a little bit slower than VO2 max. So we have another pace that comes out here, and this would be like 5K pace. But what if you're a 10K runner? Well, 10K pace is going to be, depending on how fast you are, either just a little faster or just a little bit slower than lactate threshold. Let's say that it's just a little bit faster than lactate threshold. So you have another pace here that you'd want to train, which would be your 10K pace, and onward for any other additional race distance. Maybe if you run a half marathon, you also want to train at half marathon pace, which is going to be somewhere between marathon pace and 10K pace, right? So we get all of these paces that start to become relevant. So can you see that logically, to be a well-rounded runner, you're going to want to train at repetition pace, VO2 max, 5K pace, 10K pace, half marathon pace, lactate threshold, marathon pace, easy pace, etc. And who said that there's anything wrong with walking? We don't like to walk as runners, but let me ask you this. If you ran 50 miles a week versus if you ran 50 miles a week and hiked 50 miles a week, because you like to hike, do you think that you're going to be a better runner? Do you think that the 50 miles of hiking is going to make you a better runner, provided that you're also recovering and you're sleeping enough to recover? But if you did that, wouldn't all of that walking, it's not going to hurt your running. It's probably going to make you more efficient. It's probably going to burn off extra fat reserves on your body. Walking would actually be in this range down here. Easier than easy. But we've already said that that's a no man's land. So we should probably add in some really slow, like walking or very slow running. So we have yet another pace that gets unlocked that's gonna benefit us. And so I challenge you to find any pace that isn't going to benefit your running. Now, what about the one all the way at the top? Repetition training up here is maybe a pace that you could hold for like a 400 meter or an 800 meter. It's pretty fast, but it's not an all-out sprint. Now, the idea is if you train your running economy through repetition training up here, that you're gonna get more efficient. And this is very true. You definitely wanna do this, but doesn't mean that you should never sprint all out or almost all out. And I'll tell you that no, that would be a huge mistake. Now we're gonna break this down and I'm gonna share with you what paces you actually might want to train in order to get better. Because the idea of this whole thing here is that we wanna be efficient with our training. So we wanna run just the paces that matter and we don't wanna waste our time. All right, let's go through the fallacies of training like this. In order to think that we should be improving our VO2 max, our lactate threshold, and our running economy, that goes off of a model of training that says this. And that model of training says that there are three things that determine how good of a runner you are. The first one is your VO2 max. The second one is your lactate threshold. And the third one is your running economy. Now, this was made popular by the great coach, Jack Daniels. I highly recommend. He's a smart guy, Dr. Jack Daniels. This is basically coming from him. And it says that if you want to predict how good of a runner you are, you could get these three measurements and you would be able to tell. Now, the problem is that these are not equal. Not at all. Not even close. I'm going to prove to you right now definitively that this is not how you want to train. Ready? Let's take them one at a time. Let's take VO2 max first. VO2 max. In a marathon, you're only running at about 85% of your VO2 max. Could be a little more, a little bit less, depending on who you are. But something is getting maxed out. When you get to that last mile in the marathon, you're going as hard as you can. You're maxed out, but you're only at 85% of your VO2 max. But something is at 100%. It's not your VO2 max. So VO2 max cannot be what limits your performance. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a good VO2 max. It's gonna help you, but it's not what limits your performance. Now, if you wanna get better at your race, especially if it's a marathon, you might wanna get better at the thing that limits your performance because it's limiting your performance. You wanna take away the limiter, we have to identify what that is. Well, it's not your VO2 max because you're only at 85%. Okay, what about your lactate threshold? Now, lactate threshold in a marathon, you might be closer to 90 or even 95% of what you're capable of your lactate threshold. Yet once again, something is getting maxed out at 100% and it's not your lactate threshold. So why would we care about improving the lactate threshold if the lactate threshold isn't the thing that is limiting our performance? So what about running economy? Now, running economy is how efficient your body moves. So there's a lot of different things that go into it. From the actual grand motion of your running mechanics, whether your arms are flailing or whether they're nice and streamlined, that's gonna change your running economy. Because if you're inefficient and if you run like this, you're gonna burn up a lot of extra energy. But your running economy also has to do with if you zoom in at the cellular level, zoom in on the muscles in your legs. How efficiently do those muscles create energy? How efficiently do those muscles fire? Are the nerves that innervate them myelinated so that they fire efficiently? Are the right muscle fibers innervated by the right nerves? It's like it goes so deep from a big scale to a small scale. So running economy really flippin' stinkin' matters. But the problem is running economy is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 100 things. So this one really matters. Big check mark. really matters. VO2 max and lactate threshold, they don't limit your performance. They support your ability to keep moving forward, but they don't limit your performance. So they matter much smaller amounts. So we really want to be focusing on getting more efficient at running. Okay, now how do you get more efficient at running? Woo! Now, how do you get better at running efficiency? Now, this is really important because I want you to see that there is a continuum again. It's just a continuum that's not based off of effort level or heart rate. It's a continuum that's based off of your muscle fiber type. So let's draw a nice line here. And this represents all of your muscle fibers from, let's go over here and we'll call this fast. Now I'm gonna call that fast for like fast twitch muscle fibers or a fast pace. And we'll go over here and we'll call this slow twitch muscle fibers or running at a slow, nice, easy pace. And right in the middle, somewhere, no matter your race distance, somewhere in the middle, you're gonna have your race pace. So for the sake of marathoners, I'm just gonna call this marathon pace. But if you're a 5K runner, this could be 5K pace or 10K pace or 1 mile pace. It's just race pace. Now, here's how you get better. And it's not through using junk miles versus not junk miles. It's about doing everything across the board. That pyramid that we just had up there, you want to train everything on the pyramid. But the problem is you want to train most specifically for the demands of your race day. So that's not everywhere on the pyramid. So here's where it gets good. If you're a marathoner, you want to train mostly at marathon pace, logically. This would make sense. So that would mean your training would exist here. You're going to run about marathon pace, maybe a little bit faster, maybe a little bit slower. Makes sense, right? But the problem is you can only do so much volume here. Let's say you want to run 80 miles a week. Are you going to run 80 miles a week at marathon pace? You're going to die. Like, that's pretty tough. So you can only run some marathon pace. Now, if you start running at marathon pace early on in your training, when you're 4 months away from your marathon, the problem is you're not fit enough yet to do 16 miles or 20 miles at marathon pace. You can't do it. You're not fit enough. You need 3 months before you get there. So instead of training at like 5 miles at marathon pace and then 6 and then maybe 10 and then maybe 12 and trying to up it, if you do that, you're going to burn out because the only way for you to get better is to train more and more and more and more and more at the same pace. It's not a good idea. So we're going to save this until the end of your training when you are almost ready for your race, when you're about 6 weeks out from your race. We're going to do a lot of training here. So what do we do before that? Well, we're going to train a little bit faster than and a little bit slower than race pace. Why? Here's why. So if you were to be able to complete workouts that existed here, so watch this. Imagine how hard a 20-mile run at marathon pace is. It's pretty tough, right? But what would make it easier? What if you could run faster than marathon pace, but for less distance? So maybe 10 miles at 15 seconds faster than your marathon pace. If you could do that and you could run slower than marathon pace, but for really long, so maybe a 20 or a 25 mile run or 50 miles per week of your 80 miles per week are run here. If you could do lots of volume here and lots of volume here, don't you think that when it comes time to do that big run here, you're going to be able to? Yeah, I thought so. So we want to do this as our final preparation, but leading into that, you want to run here. But I'll tell you what, running 10 miles at 15 seconds faster than marathon pace is still pretty hard. Maybe you can't even do that yet. So we want to spend a good amount of time training over here and over here. And what this means is that we want to spend some time in foundational training or base training. And base training does not, listen very carefully here, base training does not mean running easy all the time. That's just easy running all the time. So if you think that base training is running lots of volume very slow, you are wrong. You're gonna get good at running slow, and then you're gonna try to run fast on race day? I don't think so. So base training means, yes, running slow and lots of it, but very slow. Don't you dare start running medium hard and race pace. Don't do it. Run slow, but do lots and lots and lots of it. Why lots? Because you can run more without getting injured. When you run slower, you have less impact, which means less injury risk. You also spend more time training, which is one of the biggest indicators of your aerobic development, how much time you spend training. But base training should also include running over here, which is very fast. Maybe all out sprinting sometimes, maybe just shy of that and running what I call strides sometimes, and maybe running repetition training sometimes, which would be here. So you're doing a little bit of everything and lots of easy running. Now, when you do this a lot, you can increase your mileage. Maybe you're starting at 25 miles per week. Maybe you could run 50 miles per week if you ran most of it, if you ran 47 of them very slow and 3 of them very fast, broken into very small, tiny sections, like 100 meters at a time, very fast. Okay, then what happens? Now you switch when you're about 3 months out from your race. Now you run somewhere between very fast and marathon pace. This would be your 400s, your 800s, your faster tempo runs, your 20-minute, 30-minute, 40-minute tempo runs, things like that. And you maybe make your long run not quite as long. So maybe you did long runs that are 20, 25 miles, maybe 30 miles even out here. And as you get closer to your race, maybe you only run 16 to 18 miles, but they're run a little bit faster. Okay? And then when you're a month and a half out from your race, you're so flipping gosh dang fit that you can do monster workouts here. And my friends, this is what will get you a breakthrough in your performance. So notice how there is not a single junk mile anywhere. Here is your take-home message. Make sure that you're listening here. Very important. If you're just listening audio, stop what you're doing, pull the car over, stop the run, and watch. This is very important. There is no junk mile here. You should be running every pace from all-out sprint to very easy, and you should be hitting all of them in your season. But the emphasis of when you run at each pace is what matters. Very early on in your season, you're running here and here. So let's call this phase 1 of training. You can also call it base training. You're gonna do that for a good long time. Maybe months, maybe years. You can spend a lot of time training here and you're gonna be pretty good. Then you're gonna go to phase 2 training. I call this support training. Call it whatever you like. You're gonna spend about 6 weeks here. Then you're gonna spend about 6 weeks, not more, maybe less if you're crunched for time. You're gonna do phase 3 training. So which one is most important? You might think that phase 3 training is most important because it's most specific to the demands of your race. And you'd sort of be right. But I'll tell you that if you're only used to running 20, 25, 30 miles per week and you want to run a marathon, this phase can only be so big because you can't do 3 big workouts in a week that total, plus easy running that totals 80 miles or 105 miles. You can't do that if you're only used to running 20 miles per week. So this phase seems like it matters the most, but in the long term for your training, the phase that matters the most for sure is phase 1. Now you can stay in phase 1 essentially forever. And if you stay in base training forever, what happens? Well, your injury risk is very low. You can increase your volume without getting injured. You're not gonna burn out because you're never going really hard. You're developing your ability to be explosively powerful. You're developing your ability to have a lot of aerobic development, a lot of aerobic enzymes. You're developing your efficiency by going very fast. You're developing your metabolic efficiency by going very long. And you can stay there for a very long time and you can just jump in on a race and probably do pretty dang well. And only when you really want to peak for a race, meaning that you have a big race coming up that really matters, like you're training for Boston Marathon and you've been training for 10 months and you really want to kill it on race day, then we peak you. This is the science of peaking. Notice that there is a peak to this. So this is you've probably heard of peaking, and you don't peak by running a bunch of volume all over the place and then try to sharpen up by running fast mile intervals right before your marathon. That doesn't make sense. That's not sharpening up. Sharpening up means sharpening this blade, and when it's time to sharpen up, you do whatever is specific to your race. So you run at race pace and lots of it, or maybe a little faster, maybe a little slower. That's what sharpening up means. That's what peaking means, right? Peaking is very similar to sharpening. It's the same kind of visual that we use. So what's really awesome about this is if you want to do a tune-up race, like maybe run a half marathon before your marathon, then you can run PRs in whatever distance you want leading up to your race. For example, let's say that you're training for a marathon, but you also want to run a 5K, a 10K, and a half marathon leading up to it, okay? So maybe your marathon is in December. So I'm just gonna put 12 for the 12th month in December, okay? Now, when you're a couple months away from that, you're gonna be training here. Well, this looks a lot like half marathon training or 10K training, right? You'll be doing 20-minute tempo runs, 400s, 800s, mile repeats, things like that. And, 10 to 15 mile runs that are, approaching half marathon pace. Like, you can actually run a pretty good half marathon / 10K when you're in phase 2. But what if you want to run a 5K? Well, maybe early on in your phase 2 or very early on, you're training much faster than marathon pace. You're training at about 5K pace, aren't you? So this would be a great place to put a 5K race. And notice that you can actually run well from the 5K to the 10K, half marathon, marathon throughout your whole season. But what wouldn't make sense is running a 5K tune-up race right before your marathon. And what wouldn't make sense is running a half marathon tune-up race very early on in your training. That doesn't make sense, right? Because you're not fit for those yet. But the beauty of this is that you're gonna get fit across the board and you can actually have a lot of fun. And a lot of my clients, they actually do PR in the 5K, 10K, half marathon, 50K, because you can go more than a marathon and go 50K over here as well on your way to a marathon. And then here's the magic, and this is the last part of this video for you. Poof, no whiteboard. Imagine for a second here that you PR in the 10K, but you weren't training for a 10K. You were training for a marathon. Now, think about how confident you feel about the marathon. It's a lot different, isn't it? If you PR'd at a distance you weren't training for, don't you feel more confident about the distance you are training for? And that gives you confidence. And that confidence is really what I want for you when you toe the starting line. The confidence that you've run so well at all these other distances, and this is the one that you've been training for, you're gonna blow it out of the water. And this is how you go a half an hour faster, even an hour faster in your marathon in one season. You can do it. So I really hope that you got something awesome from this training. I want you to notice that nowhere in your season is there such a thing as a junk mile, meaning that there's not paces that are off limits. I want you to run at all paces throughout every phase of your training, but you're just gonna emphasize certain paces more depending on what phase of training you're in. This is why knowing what phase of training you're in is really important. If you're just gonna go out and run and try to do the same thing every week, you're never gonna truly peak. And so you might hope to get a little bit better, but it's gonna be a little bit better, and hope that you don't get injured. Hope that you don't burn out. Hope that you don't plateau. And of course, you will. So by stepping back and going to a foundational training and staying there for a long time, and then moving through each phase, you're actually gonna hit every single pace, and you're gonna be a well-rounded runner. You're gonna be very dynamic, and you're gonna be able to drop a pretty high quality race across the board at different points in your season. I appreciate you so much. I appreciate that you are willing to put work into yourself, into your running in order to learn this. Most runners will never learn this, but you just did. If you have questions, go ahead and post them below. hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and make sure that you hit the bell. Not just subscribe, but the bell as well. We really appreciate your feedback with that. We really appreciate your support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next video. Woo!
Take control, take a shot, what you waiting for? Keep it real, never gonna fake this till we make it, till we make it.